In the last video, we spoke very briefly about the contains method of the node class. So we're going to recurse through our tree, and at every single node, we're going to decide whether the value we are looking for is less than or greater than the current node we're looking at. And then depending on the answer to that question, we're either going to recurse down to the left or the right-hand side of our tree. So let's go back over to our node class. I'm going to scroll on down to the bottom, and I'm going to add on a contains method. And then we're going to expect this contains method will be called with some data argument. So the first thing we're going to do for a given node is check to see if the node has data equal to this data argument. So I'll say if this .data is equal to data, then return this. And we're specifically returning this here because remember, we want to return the entire node. Now, assuming that the current node does not contain the current value, we'll start to recurse through our tree. So we'll say if this .data, so if the current node has a value less than the data argument, that would be a case in which we want to move to the right-hand side of our tree. But we also need to consider the case that we might not have a node to the right-hand side. So after making this comparison right here, we'll also verify that there is a node on the right-hand side of this current node. And we can do that by simply saying this.right. If that is the case, so if we need to progress down to the right-hand side, then we can recurse down by saying this.right.contains data. And then that will repeat the same exact process. Now remember, with recursion, we do have to make sure that we return any recursive function call, because if this function call right here ends up returning a value, then the overall function call needs to return it as well. So we'll put a return statement right before it. This will handle recursion down to the right-hand side. We'll next do the same exact thing, but for the left-hand side. So we can say else if this.data is greater than data. That would be the case in which we need to move to the left. And there is a node to the left, then return this.left.contains data. Again, we're going to recurse down to the left-hand side. If this function call ends up returning a value, we'll make sure that we return it back from the overall function call. The last thing that we need to think about here is the case in which some data argument does not exist inside of our tree. Now, in that case, we would miss this if statement right here. We would possibly miss this if statement. And so if everything fails, then at the very end, we're going to end up returning null. Let's save this and check our test to see how we're doing. So we'll flip back over, and we've now got those 2 additional tests for checking contains working. Great. Let's continue in the next video and work on our next exercise.